Jeroen Terwoert. I'm probably pronouncing it very terribly, but you have the task of closing with the last scientific input here, and with a perhaps controversial statement. I don't know, because you haven't answered the question, but let's see what it will bring.
Okay, thank you, and thank you all for staying until the very last talk. Well, I'll start right away. I work at TNO in the Netherlands. Part of the work I present here was carried out within the framework of a bigger project in which, in fact, we are seeking for optimal ways in which we can support companies and organizations that have to deal with risks that are not fully characterized or even hardly characterized. And I think most of you will be aware of the fact that, well, in the nano field, there's lots of work to do before we will be able to carry out full risk assessments for occupational exposure. And that's what I'm talking about here. Well, I'll kick off with a true story, a short true story, and then later on dive into the so-called control bending tools or instruments and on a stakeholder dialogue that we have organized last year. Well, the true story was brought to us by an SME producer of a nano-enabled coating. It was marketed as a self-cleaning coating and offered to a company that maintained train carriages. It was claimed to be able to reduce maintenance cycles. Well, this company, this train maintenance company, saw the advantages and benefits, but nevertheless said, we cannot use this coating because our government uses the precautionary principle in its policies. So we're not taking the risk. Well, now it's true that the Dutch government, one of the features of the approach of the Dutch government is a precautionary approach, but actually there's no such thing as the precautionary principle, because there are strict definitions, there are less strict definitions, and apparently this company took a very strict definition to prevent all risks. Where were they afraid for? In fact, they were most afraid for potential liability issues in the future. They went to the supplier, asked all kinds of questions. The supplier could not answer, and with 100% certainty, and the coating was rejected. And well, the supplier was not able to make business out of his investments. Well, now the bad news, in fact, is for companies like this and other companies that had similar problems, we heard, is that 100% certainty is not to be expected within, short periods of time. And even so, if the experts say it's safe, more and more you see in at least the Western world that experts are not believed anymore always. So that brings me to my first take-home message of this afternoon, which is that in these circumstances of uncertainty, it would not be wise to stick just to technical risk assessment and risk management, which is represented here by the left part of the figure. We believe that it would be wise to include also, or to say, let's say, a wider approach to risk management, including also a number of non-technical aspects. In literature, these are often referred to as, on the one hand, concern assessment. Well, in fact, concern assessment is identifying fears, questions, concerns among all kinds of stakeholders, like your own employees, for example, but also potential customers, like we've seen here in the train company, and labor inspections also, for example. And then after that, there may be a concern management step in which, for example, risk communication is very important and stakeholder dialogue is an important aspect. Well, for the moment I've focused a little bit now on the left part, because for that part tools, or at least preliminary tools, are available. For the right part of this figure, in fact the tools are still missing. Well, one of a class of tools that are available to make a preliminary risk assessment is what is called control bending. In fact, control bending is, well, a control banding tool is a tool that supports companies in making preliminary risk assessments, which are largely qualitative or sometimes semi-quantitative. Well, I've listed here 6 of the most well-known tools that are currently available. 2 of them are web-based and have a user interface. In fact, all of these are, well, 1.0 versions and are still in development. The first one, Stoffer Manager Nano, is a tool that my own institute, TNO, has worked on. Well, these are available, but now, before that I will explain a little bit more for those of you who are not familiar with control banding. I just said that it's mostly a qualitative approach or semi-quantitative. Well, in fact, by means of a set of fixed criteria, the hazard of the nanomaterials used is allocated into one out of mostly 4 or 5 classes of hazard, also referred to as bands, control or hazard bands. Similar with exposure assessments, and those 2 factors are combined into either a risk score or risk band, or directly into a so-called control band, which is in fact well, a certain class of advised control measures, for example local exhaust ventilation. Well, now in my country we have 2 tools that are most used. Both of them were developed with support of our Ministry of Employment. Both have been based on the same body of literature, you would think, but it appeared in a number of test calculations that there is a different outcome in similar situations. Well, in fact, that's not really surprising because of the early stages of development of these tools and the very many uncertainties that still, and lacking data, there still are. But nevertheless, companies got nervous about this, started asking questions, which tool to use, which one is true. Well, yesterday in a talk of Cindy Becker we heard that in fact less than 20% of the companies made nano-specific risk assessments. Measuring, on the other hand, is also very complicated for companies. So it's a problem for them to fulfill their legal obligation, which is because making risk assessments is a legal obligation for companies. Well, on the other hand, the labor inspection and authorities had similar problems. They didn't know what to enforce, which tool is true, which is not. And they got nervous as well, and they asked my institute TNO to make a comparison of the methods on the market. And my colleague Dirk Brouwer did that, and he made a detailed assessment of the approaches of the 6 instruments I just showed, and of the assumptions and data input needed, parameters used. Well, not unsurprisingly, there were in fact quite many differences between the tools. And there's no time now to get very much into detail, but I'll be glad to share more information with you and just ask or send me an email. Main message here is that indeed the various methods can result in a range of advised levels of controls in similar situations. Well, yeah, as you said, the tools, of course, are still under development. It's a 1.0 version for all tools. There are many differences. Their ability to discriminate between classes of materials and classes of activities is still quite low due to also a lack of data in many cases. Well, in fact, measuring and validating is still a problem on its own. Measuring nanoparticles, well, we've heard something about it, and we've read something about it on posters here. It's a challenge on its own, so that's quite difficult. And due to lack of data, it seems that the tools also lead to quite conservative, very precautionary advices and high levels of controls. Also due to a number of defaults that are introduced when data are lacking. Well, these results were fed into a stakeholder dialogue that we've organized. This was a first occasion, more will follow. We invited 25 participants from authorities, for developers of the two tools that are used most in Holland, and users of the tools. Well, before the meeting, we sent out a small questionnaire to start discussion, and we facilitated the exchange of experiences, and participants could put forward concerns and questions and get into discussion with each other. I would like to show two of the questions we asked to the participants. First was, okay, when more research has been done, within a few years, we will be able to prepare full risk assessments. According to the classical paradigm, risk is exposure times effect. Well, as you will see, nobody dared to strongly agree with this one. Opinions varied a little bit, but it was well seen as a little too optimistic or at least a little too optimistic to think that. Although most of the participants acknowledge that progress is being made, we also have the problem of the horizon moving from us, because continuously new materials, nanomaterials, are being developed as well and being put on the market. Well, second question gave, well, quite varying opinions as well. Here we said, in the current uncertain situation, it doesn't really matter, in fact, which tool you use, as long as you, well, think what you do and explain and your assumptions. And the idea behind that was that in a situation with so many uncertainties, the general level of uncertainty may be quite, yeah, in fact, bigger than the differences between the various tools. Well, nevertheless, most of the participants disagreed here, because one felt that it cannot be left to the users of the tools, mostly SME companies, to choose which to use, and a certain level of harmonization was thought to be needed in order to get comparable results. Well, you may know maybe that an ISO working group, specific ISO working group, is at the moment trying to get to this harmonization. Well, just two more slides. Main conclusions from the stakeholder dialogue that we organized was, okay, as we've seen, current tools for risk assessment cannot fully guarantee the safe use of nanomaterials. One thought that sharing these kinds of concerns and experiences also between labor inspection and companies was very valuable and should be continued. On the other hand, it was felt that the absence of real disasters or real risk events with nanomaterials made that the sense of urgency is not always very high, at least not at every company. And the latter was thought to be a problem, because there were quite many issues that needed to be addressed. For example, collection of evidence-based control measures. What is evidence-based in this case? How much reduction of exposure do you need to be evidence-based, and how to validate when measuring nanoparticles is so difficult? Well, developing a user guide for the tools was thought to be a good idea. So a guidance which states which tool to use in which situation, where to get all the input that you need for it, etc. Well, how to keep the tools up to date is a problem, because our government indicates that they are not going to do that anymore. It's budget cuts all over the place, and it's, well, who will pick it up? Well, still traceability of nanomaterials and nanoproducts in the product chain is a problem, because product information in many cases does not state nanomaterials. And a number of people felt that, well, acceptance of uncertain risks among the population is a problem, because well, a risk-free society is not possible. And well, okay, on the other hand, you can say that who are we in our comfortable positions as researchers to tell workers that they should accept uncertain risks. That's something that bothers me personally. Well, very last slide to show some follow-up activities that we plan. Stakeholder dialogue activities, in one way or another, we will continue with that. Potentially interesting for part of you will be that we will make a more thorough user evaluation of the current control banding tools that are on the market by means of a questionnaire. And we hope to report on that in a paper later this year. Well, development of the tools will go on, of course. And finally, what we aim at in the bigger project I told about in the beginning was that we would like to develop practical guidelines together with companies on how to manage risks in uncertain situations and what to arrange for that, what stakeholders to use, what to communicate, what not, etc. Well, we would like to invite everybody interested in that subject to think with us and cooperate. And I think that's about what I would like to say. Thank you.
At the risk of being very unpopular with Fleming, who is now want to make this closing session, I would ask if there's one or two questions. Otherwise, you know where to find him. Yes, thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks.